as an adult, like bullying, that's a big one for people. Bullying, we went into the comfort of our home and retreated. For me personally, I developed really young. I got a lot of attention that I didn't know how to deal with. That emotions, I didn't know what it was. I was too young, and learning that, or being aware of why I hide behind my weight, is huge for me. But it's all different things. Is my family was very conservative. My dad was a blue collar worker in a white collar neighborhood. Mm-hmm. I wasn't the same as everybody else. Mm-hmm. And I think the bottom line is no matter what dealing with those emotions are, it's mm-hmm. when we're not fitting in to what we see. It doesn't mean that we're not happy. I mean, some people may not be happy, but it doesn't mean that everybody's not happy who's an emotional eater. It means that they see themselves as different and they're finding comfort somehow.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the EnvisionAir Podcast. This is the podcast where we envision living our best lives by exploring everyday topics related to health, wealth, community, and love. If you're new here, I'm your host, Nicole Nguyen. And for those returning, welcome back, EnvisionAirs. This podcast is for information purposes only and should not be considered to be medical, legal, tax, financial, or other professional advice.
This podcast does not encourage or endorse any illegal activity.
We are not responsible for any losses, damages, or liability that may arise from the information in this podcast.
The views explored in the podcast may not always be those of the host.
Today, we have a topic that I think is going to resonate with a lot of people because it definitely resonates with me. We're diving into a really interesting topic of overcoming emotional eating. And we have a very special guest named Jolene Abercromby, who's going to be talking us through this topic. Jolene is a dedicated nutritional therapy practitioner who guides women through the maze of disappointing diets in order to help reclaim their health. Her approach moves beyond the conventional obsessions with scale numbers, dress sizes, towards a more holistic health approach. Jolene really tries to explore the underlying struggles with food and body image, embracing a very compassionate and comprehensive strategy. At the core of her practice is an intricate dance between a healthy mind, body, and spirit, with a strong emphasis also on the critical gut-brain connection. She also has an awesome podcast that's called Holistic Health Made Easy, where she dives into all of these topics. So I'm really, really excited that Jolene's going to be talking about how we can all overcome emotional eating. And so thank you so much, Jolene, for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm kind of excited to talk to you about this. Ever since we've met, it's just a passion of mine to get women over that hump.
100%.
It's scary because we don't like to face what we're feeling. Mm-hmm. And even myself on the journey, like as I went on the journey, I realized that others needed someone to journey with them, because it's helpful to have someone with you along that journey rather than telling you, do this, do that. Oh, just stop. I mean, how many times have you been told, well, just put the fork down. Don't go into the pantry. That's not helpful. That's not telling you how to, or what can help you. Like my thing, I like try to guide you to be healthy. And some of that starts fading away. But I'm really excited to have this conversation with you today because, it's a journey. It's a journey.
Well, I think that's exactly it. And I mean, you do this really well. I've dived into your podcast, and I think there's so many topics that are wide ranging, that overlap with this idea of emotional eating. And I think you and I as women, we're also exposed to kind of like a diet culture at a very young age. And it's really it's not just like you said about the numbers and the dress size, because there's so much emotional elements to it. And I think like a lot of our childhood experiences, adolescent experiences, how we develop as women, our bodies, there's bullying, there is lots of different emotional traumas that happen. And I think that is part of the puzzle, right? With kind of living this sort of healthier life. And so I'm really, really, really glad that we can dive into it. So
Yeah.
okay, well, why don't we start with the crux of the actual issue, the topic here, which is how would you define emotional eating,
Okay.
and how do you think it develops?
Emotional eating is actually really complex, but the core is that we deal with emotions by eating our food, by eating
Mhm.
food that we shouldn't, and it's generally things that give us comfort. So
Mhm.
it varies person to person. You can't just say it's junk food. It could be something that your grandmother made that made you feel comfortable and safe. We're using it because there is a mechanism inside of us. The studies it's such a complex issue that the studies can't pinpoint it. It's not like other mental disorders where there's like a dopamine problem or a mental imbalance or a chemical imbalance in the brain. This
Mhm.
is almost learned to an extent. So we eat to soothe our emotions. It's that simple, and often it's overeating. When they studied a broad range of people, healthy versus maybe those, and it's funny because they defined it as healthy and those that were obese. And to me, that's not necessarily healthy. Healthy, I think in their mind, healthy was skinny. They didn't
Mm.
really pinpoint that. When you start looking at the studies, you're like, well, what does that mean? Healthy
Mhm.
versus obese, or healthy versus unhealthy? Like, there's more to it than that. But somebody who ate relatively healthy didn't necessarily have as much issues with emotional eating as someone who was not thin. I'm going to put it that way, because how do you
Okay.
define it?
Yeah.
The studies were a little weird, but they basically said that they couldn't pinpoint what the root cause was. So that's where it dives into like psychologists talking to patients, because everything is self-reported.
Okay.
When it comes to the science of emotions, there is no way to do randomized controlled trials. It's everything is about talking to patients and writing it down and collecting the data. And there's no way to do a true, like, okay, this chemical is doing this, because it's beyond that.
Mhm.
Um, so at an early age, for whatever reason, a lot of us
Mhm.
weren't taught properly how to cope with emotions, or we aren't dealing with the emotions properly. And it can stem, and that's where it becomes complex, because it can stem from a number of issues. You can be incredibly successful, very happy in your family life, and still have emotional eating because some little thing that happened as a child triggered. Um,
Yeah.
or as an adult, like bullying, that's a big one for people. Bullying, we went into the comfort of our home and retreated. Um, for me personally, I developed really young, and I got a lot of attention that I didn't know how to deal with. That emotions, I didn't know what it was. I was too young. And back when I was 10, 11 years old, is not like a 10 and 11-year-old today. We were naive.
Mhm.
We were told at one point, yeah, you have to be careful. Everybody's trying to kidnap you, because like there was all this stuff going on at the time. It was just random stories. But at the same time, we were shoved out the door and playing outside all day. Like
Right.
there,
Right.
there was this weird balance. Um, and learning that, or being aware of why I hide behind my weight,
Mhm.
is huge for me. But it's all different things. Is my family was very conservative. My dad was a blue collar worker in a white collar neighborhood. I
Mhm.
wasn't the same as everybody else. And
Mm.
I think the bottom line is no matter what dealing with those emotions are, it's
Mhm.
when we're not fitting in to what we see. It
Yeah.
doesn't mean that we're not happy. I mean, some people may not be happy, but it doesn't mean that everybody's not happy who's an emotional eater.
Yeah.
It means that they see themselves as different and they're finding comfort somehow.
Yeah.
They retreat. A lot of emotional eaters are closet eaters. They eat when they're alone. They don't eat in front of people.
Right.
Because they'll fit in that way, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I'd love to unpack everything you said. So like getting back to like the emotional eating, which how you define. So it was very much like when we're young, we learn, it's like a learned behavior, and we link emotions with food. They could be good or bad. It could go both ways. It's obviously not intentional of our parents or, the people, caregivers, but it essentially a lot of it stems when you're a child. Is that right?
A lot of it will start as a child or teenagers. It may not develop into a health or weight problem. I mean, I don't like to look at weight, but when you're morbidly obese, weight is a health problem. But it doesn't necessarily morph into that, and it could wait till you're older because you're still participating in activities and you're burning it all off. But there is a lot of youth that retreat to food for comfort. And the key is, I mean, for some of us, we were fortunate. We came out as adults without a true serious eating disorder, but it's still disordered eating. And when there is a separation, but emotional eating, if gets extreme, can lead to anorexia, bulimia, because as much as they go to the food for comfort, they don't want to see it on their body. So it leads to a bigger problem down the road.
Fascinating.
But emotional eating, there's a fine line of where it gets diagnosed and where it doesn't. And that's where a lot of us just are like, oh, well, I just overeat, because we're not facing the facts of why we're overeating, why every time we go and we're home alone, we go to the refrigerator or the pantry and have a bite of something. It doesn't even have to be like we're eating snacks all the time. It could be like, oh, I just want a cherry, or, oh, there's a little M&M. I'm going to have, whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's as we age, it becomes mindless. We don't even realize we're doing it anymore.
Yeah, 100%. And would you say that if someone is thin or not thin, or, anything in between, it doesn't necessarily, you don't have to be one or the other to be an emotional eater. It can go along the spectrum.
Very much so. And I think someone who presents as being healthy and thin, and I do that, actually mean that as being healthy and thin, they can emotionally eat, but right, like for an occasion, let's say they had a bad day at work, so they'll emotionally eat that night, but then they go right back to all their healthy habits.
Interesting.
They somehow can mitigate where others of us don't. And maybe it's just the perceived trauma from an earlier age. Trauma has been thrown around so much. I don't love to use that word. I'll be honest. It's thrown around all the time. But it is something that made us uncomfortable. That's deep down inside, that we things will trigger it.
Yeah.
It's more than just like, some people will emotionally eat from stress, but they generally can mitigate that the rest of the week, or when they're not as stressed.
Yes.
Those that I used to work in the fashion industry, and one day, and it was when I was getting one of my healthy incarnations in my 30s. And the boss sent the fit model over, who was a complete nasty person, to ask if I would wear the skirt. And he wanted to know if I would wear the skirt because I wasn't stick thin, because in fashion, most models are stick thin. But I wasn't. She said, oh, he wants to know if you want to wear it because you have a big butt. I mean, it came out of her mouth just like that, and that triggered something. But it's those little things like that re-triggered some of those, I just lost 50 pounds. What do you mean? Like, it wasn't,
Right.
it's that I'm not that fitting in. And I think we have to be aware
Yeah.
of what's going on. And luckily she was just a nasty person. So I blew it off rather quickly, because I then talked to my owner of the company, who is this man who was a multi-billionaire. He goes, no, I just wanted to make sure that a curvy girl would wear it, or something, like really, really flattering the way he
Right.
worded it. And I'm
Right.
like, okay,
Okay.
but
Interesting.
it's like, oh, wow, this is interesting on how, because I kind of felt that emotion. And so it's like diving into, is it the sexual attention? Were you bullied? Were you sexually assaulted? Um, what is it? And that's the gamut of things as well. Like,
Mm-hmm.
if you're put in a position where you're not safe, are you running
Mm-hmm.
to food?
Mm. Oh, that's
Like,
interesting.
and it could be anything. It could
Yeah.
be you were in your car and you got scared, and then you got home and you ran to for comfort. You don't even realize it. I mean, it's similar to any, I don't want to say it's an addiction, but it's similar to a lot of addictions, because an alcoholic at first started using, or drug addict started using it to soothe the pain, to fit in.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, unlike that, we can't tell people to stop eating.
Yeah. 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 Of course. Yeah. Would you say that emotional eating, if someone turns to like salad and fresh fruit, but like overeats on that, would you still think that that is sort of emotional eating in a sort of negative way or a sort of less positive way?
It can be, but I think that is someone that's actually tried to work through it. Your
Mm,
chances of you going to a fruit, maybe a vegetable, is
mm-hmm,
less likely. The
mm-hmm,
dopamine hit of a salad versus a dopamine hit of a bowl of cherries are totally different.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Cherries, you're like, ooh, they're nice, they're fun, they're refreshing. A salad, you're like, oh, it's a salad.
Yeah. So reach for the salad,
Reach for
basically.
the salad. I mean, and that's one of the ways we can start working on it. In We tend to not, as emotional eaters, reach healthy food as much. It might be what we call healthy, like a bar, um, like a granola bar or something like that, but it's usually something that is fat and sweet. It's got fat, and when I say fat, I mean like it's got fats in it and it's sugary.
Yeah.
It's gonna be a chocolate bar. It's gonna be a granola bar that's sweet.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, it might
It's
be peanut butter with your apples, but like if you have peanut butter and apples, that's not bad. But are you eating 3 apples with your peanut
right.
butter? Or are you
Right.
eating the whole jar of peanut butter with your one apple? Like,
Right.
those are the things we have to like start. And it's not that you're a bad person that you did it. We just have to start being aware so we can start mitigating it and knowing if we need help. There is nutritionists that can help you through something like I've gone through, that are small and easy in their habits. Then there are things that really truly need um, a psychologist or a psychotherapist, someone in the mental health space. And the problem is there's a disconnect between what they should do. And that's why a lot of times they come to someone like me, because someone in the mental health wants them to eat everything and just learn how to moderate. Well, not everybody can do that. Sometimes those trigger foods, even if we get beyond the emotions, those trigger foods still trigger us.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's where, like, people don't understand that if something happened and every time you were sad, stressed, and your mom always gave you a certain treat to make you feel better, whether it's a chocolate chip cookie, a candy bar, cake, fruit, whatever it is, sometimes we need to remove that altogether because it's associated with feeling better. And people will often say, no, you shouldn't restrict that. But I don't know if you're on that middle road where we're not going to get diagnosed one way or the other. If we could, sometimes we do have to restrict the foods that set off the binge, because the binge isn't always I can't stop eating because I'm a binge eater. The binge sometimes is a trigger for something deeper inside. And it's often overlooked in the mental health space.
Yeah.
It's, and it could be and the reason why you don't see it that much is because, I mean, you don't see it talked about that much, is because it's the gamut of, it could be anything. Anything can be a trigger.
Yeah.
So we really just need to learn it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Learn what our
100%.
triggers are.
Well, and I think what I really wanted to ask you about, because you mentioned this idea that when you were younger, you developed earlier, and you mentioned that that was one of the reasons why maybe you felt like you were uncomfortable and you had to like hide behind extra weight. And you've talked about it on your podcast as well. And I guess the question I have for you is, how did you discover that that's what you were doing?
Oh, years. So I did develop really young, and I was 10 in 1980. So, yeah, I'm going to be 54 here pretty soon. So we weren't as sexually aware, I would say, as people, as children are today. We would watch the TV shows and not understand the jokes.
Mm-hmm.
It was just our life. It wasn't, it's not good or wrong. Like, not what one's not right or wrong. It's just, it was different. And I realized I gained weight. And then as I became a teenager, and I look back at now, I realized it a little bit older. So there's cycles. As I looked back on my life, there was definitely cycles of, I lost the weight, I got a little bit healthier, I got attention, boyfriend broke up, I gained back the weight. And someone's going to say, well, that's just normal. No, it's because there was always a comment, you're gaining weight. Or an attention where they cheated, or it was something. In my 20s, I was probably the smallest ever. And that, you're a wild time. I mean, you're exploring life, you're exploring yourself. And it was a lot of attention that I thought I wanted, and I didn't realize I was miserable. I didn't want the attention. And the only way I knew how to stop the attention was gaining the weight. And I didn't realize I was doing it. All of a sudden I ended back, I mean, after losing all this weight and being almost a bodybuilder, like I was at the gym all the time, super cut, all that, ending up within, I don't know, 8 years back where I started. I mean, it took me a while to get back to where I started, but I got right back to where I started.
Mm-hmm.
And the cycle started all over again in the 30s. And so as I looked back, this last health journey, I realized a lot of it had to do with finding someone, a partner in life. It was always about, oh, if I lose the weight, I'll find the partner in life. But that started at an early age where, oh, well, I'm developed and I'm looking, I'm curvy. I look older for my age and I got all this attention. So that's what guys like. But at that age, I didn't want it.
Yeah.
I didn't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
I was teased all the time. So, and then anytime something creepy, like I had a stalker boyfriend, the weight came back. Luckily, he didn't know where I lived. It was kind of nice. I mean, he wasn't really a boyfriend. He was like a 3-dater, and then like that.
Yeah.
I'm like, thank God he doesn't know where I lived, because I lived alone. I
Jeez.
resorted a lot to comfort with food, to hide that I didn't feel comfortable in my body, which makes no sense because I didn't feel comfortable in my body one way or the other.
Yeah.
And the last session, when I started my health journey, I was already married. I'm married to a man who doesn't care. I mean, one way or the other. He's never talked about my body in that manner.
Yes.
Where it's a weight, it's all about the weight. It's whatever you want to do, hun. That's it. You don't want to eat that? Okay, I'll eat that and you eat this. It's like, it was. And so then I realized, oh, okay, this is what's going on. And I started working through it. But as I went back to school and got my credentials and struggled building a business, I realized I was starting to fall back into old habits again. Because it's a form of hiding if I'm not successful. oh, it's because nobody wants to take information from a fat nutritionist. I never got there, but like I caught myself. I'm like, oh,
Wow.
yeah, I see what I'm doing. See what I'm doing.
Right.
And it's true. Like, I mean, how many people want who's it's true and it's not, because I've been along the journey. So I have the information to do it. And I actually want people to join me on the journey versus, oh, do this diet, be this 20-year-old. And
Yeah.
it's just not working for most of us.
Right.
But like it takes being self-aware. Like, so how do you figure out if your emotional eater is being self-aware?
Mm-hmm.
If you're mindlessly eating, it's not like everyone wants to blame the food, but there's half the population out there that doesn't do that.
Yes. Well, that's a really great segue into exactly that question, which was, how do we identify if someone's listening and they're like, oh, I think I might be an emotional eater? What are some specific things they can look out for? So mindless eating, that was one of them.
Mindless eating is huge.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a really bad day or if something goes negative towards you and the first thing you want to do is run to the fridge or stop at the store and buy whatever makes you comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
I used to stop at Whole Foods and they had organic vanilla Oreo cookies. They weren't Oreos, they're the vanilla sandwiches, and eat the whole box over the weekend after I had a bad week.
Yes.
That's emotional eating.
Right. Right.
When you can't control, like when you buy something and you can't control eating it, we call it binge eating, but binge eating is a form of emotional eating.
Right.
You're eating mindlessly. You're eating because you don't feel good. You think it'll make you feel better. And then you berate yourself because you couldn't control what you ate.
Yeah.
That's not helping yourself at all.
Right.
So being very mindful of your emotions, which for my generation, I think is coming better, that we're getting better at learning our emotions, talking about it, getting help. But there was a huge segment of our lives that we're just told to suck it up and go.
Yes.
So if you grew up in a household where you were told to suck it up and go, be careful, because that's a really easy way to fall into emotional eating.
Yes.
If you've struggled with your weight for years, you've lost the weight, you gained the weight, you lost the weight, you gained the weight. Those yo-yo cycles says that there's something triggering you to go back to your old habits.
Yeah.
Now, if all you're doing is quick fix dieting, there is some room for error in there, but like if you're doing it in a manner that a normal person would, I don't want to say normal, but a healthy person would lose the weight and keep it off and stick with the healthy habits. That's not what I'm talking about. It's, oh, I worked really hard, I lost all this weight, and then a few years later, you're right back where you started.
Yeah. Yeah.
Something triggered you. If life events trigger you to go to food.
Okay. So
which is hard one, because I don't know how you grew up, but everything surrounds around food.
Yeah. Well, that's it. I wanted to ask you on that point about triggers. Like, what are some common triggers that you've seen that kind of surround this emotional eating? So like you said, like life events, but presumably is it more like high stress life events, sad events, but also maybe happy?
It could be even happy. I mean, researchers, like when you do any kind of search on it, they'll always talk about the negative ones because they don't feel that the happy ones trigger. But even happy, when you are taught at an early age that you feel sad, you get a treat. You hurt your knee, you get a treat. Oh, it's your birthday, here's a treat. Oh, we're going out with so-and-so for their birthday, it's a treat. Like everything revolves around a special thing. And food, I grew up in, I know my last name doesn't say this, but I grew up in a big Italian family. That's my married name. So I grew up in a big Italian family. Everything is surrounded by food.
Yes.
There's food everywhere.
Yes.
Are certain cultures, and it's a lot of cultures. The more I learn, it's a lot of cultures. They show love by feeding you.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And some of that is projected from their childhood of being poor, of not having enough. So
Yes.
then they project the food on you.
Yeah.
But learning, if besides events triggering it, if you eat a certain food
Mm-hmm.
and then you can't stop eating, that's attached to some old emotion somewhere.
That's
Yeah,
really
it's addictive.
fascinating.
Yes, like ultra processed foods is built to be addictive, but it's more than that because somebody else can stop.
Yes. Can I
And
ask you a question?
that's a hard one to face. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, 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 absolutely. I want to ask you a question on that same point about hormones because sometimes, well, obviously, women, we have cycles, and so that can obviously affect, different like emotions, but also like even our needs, our body's needs, and so
Mm-hmm.
on. But then, I also wonder if men too have some sort of, I've heard that they have cycles in hormones as well, like with testosterone and so on. So I guess my question is, because there are some times, and I know people are listening going, yeah, that's me. Like you just feel like you're a bottomless pit, like for whatever reason, like that day. You haven't necessarily, you don't feel stressed per se. You just feel really hungry. And I wonder, how do you decipher between like, again, that instance of like, my body needs this versus is this emotional eating? I'd like to understand how we can do that a practical
Yeah,
way.
okay. So a practical way would be if, and it's true, your hormones, your cycle, our insulin sensitivity fluctuates throughout the cycle. So there's going to be days where you're just going to be hungrier because your body's preparing for to get pregnant. That's what our bodies do, and then we don't, or we do, whichever. But it's preparing. So there are times where it needs more food, and if you're eating healthy food that day and it goes and it's satisfying you, it's just hunger.
Mm.
When you're, and it could be the same day, you're eating healthy food but you need a chocolate bar. Okay, a chocolate bar, not a problem. When that chocolate bar, because you bought a box, turns into the whole box, that's when
Mm-hmm.
you've taken it over the edge to a trigger.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
One of the things is hormone imbalance in general can create this waves of the hunger, high and low.
Mm-hmm.
And because the emotions are going, it can trigger emotional eating to a degree because hormones are highly linked to our emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the things where if you start focusing in on gut health a little bit, it affects your brain chemistry. So you can kind of be more aware of what's going on if you're truly hungered. Women today in general, if you've dieted on and off at all in your life, you've screwed up your hunger signals. So first we got to get those working right.
Interesting.
You gotta listen to your body and trust that it's not um, forsaking you. It really does tell you what it needs. It's your brain. Our brain overrides what our body is telling us what we need.
Yeah.
And there's a huge difference between the two. And it's a fine line because we've damaged some of these hunger hormones.
Mm.
Besides our normal hormone balance, it's all off, and that creates a storm for us to get completely unhealthy and cave into the emotional eating a lot more than normal.
Yeah. And so if someone's listening and they're identifying with a lot of what we've talked about and they suspect they could be an emotional eater, what are some ways they can actually, I guess, get that confirmation in terms of like, if they are like, yeah, I identify with a lot of these things. I eat when I'm sad. I eat when I'm happy. I eat when I'm bored. I eat all the time. And to the point where maybe it's binge worthy more so than just for satiation. Do you think that they should, like you talked about hormones, should they do like a full sort of, are there hormone tests they should do? Should they be talking to a nutritionist? Should they just be like reading up on emotional eating? What do you think is a good sort of way to start even like learning about themselves and trying to assess whether this is actually factually for them, like this is what they should be focusing on. And then how can, if they're like, it's all yes, what are some ways they can start to overcome the emotional eating? So it's two-pronged question.
Yeah. Trying to figure it out is difficult because of what it is. It could be anything. So if you think you're on that road, is start being more aware of yourself, of how you're feeling when you're eating. Try to start eating meals at a table, preparing a meal, eating it at the table, eating slow, chewing your food. In our stressful environment, sometimes we eat on the run, we eat standing up. Those are things that will conflict and actually cause you to overeat as well. So we want you to sit calmly at a table, eat, and see if you get full. See if you don't have that if there is a nagging thing, there's a difference between feeling comfortable after your meal and satiated versus this nagging thing. Okay, I'm going to sit here calmly and eat, but there's ice cream in the freezer. I'm going to have that ice cream. Oh, I'm not going to finish my plate because there's ice cream in the freezer. Like, there's that nagging behind you. And then check in with yourself. Why is that ice cream talking to you? What happened today? What happened this week? What did someone say? And there's going to be a time where for some, it's more than slight bullying. Bullying happens all the time. There's the bullying that, we're kind of talking about that we can overcome on our own. And then there is significant bullying where it actually alters you. For those instances, you're going to need to find someone you can speak with that can help you through those emotions. Because you might think you're fine, that you've gotten over it, but did you just pack it away on the inside and shut the door? Like, we all have that drawer or the closet where we just keep stuffing stuff and shutting it. That's what happens. Like sometimes the emotion, we do that.
Yeah.
So in that case, you need to speak with someone that can help pull you through. And it could even be a nutritionist that is versed enough to hear you. For many, it's just amount of talking about it out loud. They've never said it out loud. Once they say it out loud, they have this freedom.
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially for men, if they were bullied, but they're supposed to be big, tough men, they may never say anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Women at the same thing. We're supposed to be all pretty and whatnot. So we got some sexual attention that we didn't like and we stuff it in a drawer. It doesn't mean anything huge happened, that legal things would get involved. It just means that we got attention. Someone touched us slightly inappropriately, not enough, they got slapped, whatever, but whatever it is, we got to get that out of that drawer. We got to face what happened. And that's probably the hardest thing to do.
I was going to say, yeah, because like, it's good to face it. So like if someone has something they're listening and like there is a little trigger that they're getting in their head right now, obviously, if it's feasible, I always tell people it's good to kind of journal a little bit, but also I guess I really want to caveat it and say, like, if someone's feeling like there's something that they've suppressed and all of a sudden it's coming to the forefront right now and it's very serious and they feel like they can't even process, like it's so scary. That seems to be almost like a good time to say, maybe talk to someone in a more professional situation, a counselor or some sort of, maybe a psychotherapist or a therapist or something who's a bit more versed, who can actually guide someone through, because it's healing. That is healing that is needed.
It's complete healing that's needed. And my biggest advice is talk to that person about the emotions. And when you're ready, talk to a nutritionist who can help you clean up some of your diet to stop triggering those emotions. And it's more than willpower and discipline. It's about working on getting your signals working so you can hear them. It's about getting your gut health so that that gut brain connection isn't failing you. When you have a healthy brain, it's easier to not fall into those old traps. Your brain all of a sudden has the right nutrients and chemicals in it, and the gut isn't that gut feeling. That gut feeling is real. When we get those butterflies, it's our gut communicating with back and forth to our brain.
Yeah.
So if we can get our body running smoother, and then it also gives us the confidence.
Okay.
We're empowered. We become empowered to take care of ourselves. And that strength alone helps overcome, helps overcome all of the negativity that we've dealt with as we're dealing with whatever that emotion is.
Yeah.
They kind of go hand in hand. I think too often we try to blame the food, blame the fork, blame willpower, blame this. There's something inside of us that causes us to fail. And it could be different areas of your life. It's not always food. Sometimes this emotional trauma goes with work, losing jobs all the time, whatever it is. I strongly want to advocate for people to get the help they need through this.
Yeah.
We live in a really mean society right now. So there's a lot more triggers than there used to be. And it might not be to you. You might see somebody comment to someone else online and it triggers whatever is inside of you.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I'm going to do, because I think this will be really helpful. Triggering, let's talk about the triggers. And for each trigger, I want you to tell me like almost like something that could, a strategy to deal with it. Okay. So if I said someone is feeling bored, what should they do?
They should try to find something to do. I coach people on not just their food. Find a hobby that keeps you busy. Find something that enjoys yourself or makes you enjoyed.
Yeah.
We mindlessly scroll. We mindlessly watch TV. That leads to boredom.
Yeah. Okay. So hobby.
A hobby.
Okay. So again, emotional eater, their trigger is boredom. Find a hobby, something to be more productive in that moment when you're triggered. Yeah.
Something to do with your hands. Because honestly, when you start doing something with your hands, you get distracted and then the trigger you forget about it. You forget about the kitchen because your hands are busy, whatever it is.
Right. So like knitting or I don't know, something with the hands. Okay. Drawing.
Or if nothing else, go for a walk.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. Let's do the same, but with all the different triggers. So emotional eater, trigger is being bullied and feeling very sad, like feeling very bad about themselves. So they're like, they're about to reach the kitchen. What do they do instead? Sad.
This is feeling sad. Feeling sad's a hard one, but you kind of have to feel your feelings. We go to the kitchen to not feel our feelings. Feel it, acknowledge it, and let it go. Like I'm very big in we have the power to let it go. And I would also say start and journal about it. Write it down, write out whatever comes to mind, write it out. A lot of people don't like to journal because they don't want to face what they really need to be facing.
Love that. No, go ahead. What were you going to say?
No, I was going to say I was one of those that I hated journaling because I didn't want to face what I wanted to write.
Interesting. And how did you get over that?
Facing what I didn't want to write, facing it. And sometimes it's speaking it. Sometimes my podcast actually becomes the journal, but getting it out there, realizing that there's other people that need to do the same thing. Like I'm not alone in this.
Yeah.
You feel very lonely, but you're not alone.
Right. Okay. I feel like also maybe another thing could be like reaching out to someone, like someone who cares, like a loved one or a friend maybe as well.
And another good one is going to a coffee shop. If nothing else, go get yourself a cup of coffee.
Yeah. And just being around people.
Being around people. Try not to isolate.
Yeah. Okay. And then another trigger is a happy one. So let's say it's like big family gathering, special occasion, although sometimes there's many special occasions, right? And so so the question is, what do you do in that situation? So you're happy actually, but you're still triggered because like that's the habitual go-to is food, food, food. What do you do? What do they do in that situation?
Talk to everybody.
Mm,
It's going to be a weird one, but we forget that these social occasions, the food is there because you're supposed to supply food to people. That's what parties are. But you're really there to talk to everybody. Grab a glass of water, a drink, whatever your potion is, and just walk around and make sure you say hello, however, and ask everybody there a question. Meet somebody new, maybe that isn't there. I mean, maybe somebody brought a boyfriend or there's friends there of some of the family. Go introduce yourself, go talk to them. Just walk around and make sure you talk to everybody because a social gathering should be social. And oftentimes everybody just sits around and eats.
right. I love that. That's so good. It's like reframing what we understand, which is food, amazing, versus social, like people.
Yeah. And I also suggest like making yourself a plate. I'm not telling you to starve yourself. Make yourself a plate and walk around with the plate. Get away from the food area and then go socialize.
Yeah, that's great. And what if you have, but what if you have that, like, I don't know, I mean, this is in the Italian culture, the nonna who's like, but you have to eat, why are you not eating? Or anyone like the grandma, the woman, the matriarch who obviously loves and shows love with food. And you have people being like, eat more, da, da, da. What does one do in that situation?
So if it's not a sit down dinner, because that's a lot harder to do, but if it's somewhere where it's like outside gathering or everybody's walking around, you make yourself a plate and you eat it slowly as you're walking around. And there's always some food on that plate.
Right.
People don't realize
interesting
that you haven't had, believe it or not, as long as you look like you ate, nobody realizes how little or how much you actually ate. Right. We all think that everybody's looking at us at a party or everybody's watching every morsel. They're not.
Yeah.
They're not. They're not. I mean, mom sometimes used to, but like as long as you eat, nobody will say anything.
Yeah. Okay. I love that. Another one is loneliness. So emotional eating, feeling very lonely. What do they do instead of eat?
Loneliness is a hard one, but call a friend, get out of the house. Go if nobody's around. Sometimes you need to be lonely, but you need to get out of the house. Like if you don't feel like being around anybody because you have to process something, get out of your house, go for a walk. If you're truly lonely, call people. Like don't wait for them to call you. Sometimes we wait too long and then nobody calls. Get out of your house, call somebody. But oftentimes when we're lonely, we kind of need to process whatever that is. And sometimes just going for a walk, go sitting on your back porch, wherever you can, just to get outside. It's amazing what the outside will do, even if it's at night staring up at the stars. But calling someone would be my first thing. Trying to go visit your parents if you have a good relationship with them, whatever it is, try to get people. But I know a lot of people can feel lonely around a lot of people.
Yeah.
It's that not fitting in. So know that if you ever feel like that, if you are there with them, they want you there. They wouldn't have had you there if they didn't want you there.
That's nice. That's a good reminder. The last trigger is guilt. Guilt and shame. I'm going to say
guilt and shame. Guilt and shame. That's a big one because we all go through that, and we reach to the refrigerator and we feel guiltier and have more shame. So I think you have to process your emotions on that one. That would be another journaling one. That would be. I'm very big. I was recently taught this technique and I didn't know, I was taught what it was. I kind of always tried to do it in these past 10, 20 years that I've been working on myself, but it's the stop technique. You basically stop. analyze the situation. You take a few breaths, you take some deep breaths. You observe what's going on, how you're feeling from head to toe, observe it all. And then you proceed with caution and you pause. You basically need to, before you reach in the fridge, when you're feeling guilty and shameful, stop, take a breath, realize what you're doing, and then proceed with caution. So that may have you still grab something from the fridge, but it might be fruit or a vegetable or a steak. But it may not be the mountain of ice cream or cookies or candy that you keep in there. I think that we need to get around not feeling our feelings. And sometimes this stop technique, and it actually will work in all triggers, makes you realize what you're doing. And you may still grab the food, but you took that second to realize it. And that's part of healing triggers and emotional eating. Mm-hmm. It's not stopping it right away. It's being aware of it.
Yeah.
And then you're not going to stop overnight. When you're aware of it, you make small changes that mm-hmm. help you be successful on overcoming it. And you will always have stuff that pushes you back over the edge. It's just, but that stop technique is huge in everything you do in life. If you're getting aggravated, stop, take some breaths, observe what's going on, and then proceed with caution.
I love that. It feels almost like a way of building in self-awareness.
Mm-hmm. It is.
Yeah. And it kind of feels like the more you do it, the more quickly and more self-awareness you're going to gain, because you're starting to recognize those moments, which is really, really powerful. So
it is.
Thanks for sharing that.
You're welcome. Because emotional eating, it's one of those that there's no cure. It's something you're going to have to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
We're humans. We get triggered by all sorts of things. It's how you deal with the trigger.
Yeah.
So learning little techniques, learning habits.
Mm-hmm. So good.
They're so much stronger in helping you succeed than willpower and discipline.
Mm-hmm. And building those in on a daily basis, which is quite nice.
Willpower and discipline is like putting a square peg in a round hole.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You're not dealing with the issue. You're just forcing a new solution that may or may not be good for you.
Thanks, Jolene. Well, look, that is a lot of information, and I feel like a lot of good techniques, that people can start implementing every day, which I love. So, well, now we're on to the EnvisionAir questionnaire segment.
Okay.
And so this is questions to ask you to reflect on your past, present, and future. So I know your 15-year-old self was probably, going through a lot, but what advice would you give her now that you've gone through everything and so much wisdom?
That it's okay to be different. That was a big one. Yeah. It's okay to be different. You don't have to fit in.
What are something, reflecting on your present, what is something that you're very grateful for?
Every single day I get to spend with my father. He's 92. So.
Wow. Yeah. Oh my gosh, that is so nice. 92. And are you guys super close?
We're close. My brother and I split caregiving duties. So he lives with my brother. I go up so my brother can work. So we split our time.
Wow.
During the week. So I get to, it's a lot of people look at taking care of an elderly parent as a chore, but it's something you get to do. It's time that you get. That when we were younger and dad was working, my dad worked hard his whole entire life. Like there wasn't a lot of time.
Mm-hmm.
And now we spend time together.
Beautiful.
We do fun things. So
that's nice. That's really nice. I love that. And then what is one goal that you'd like to achieve in the next 5 years?
One?
One that you want to share with us.
I want to finally finish my yoga teacher training.
Amazing. That's awesome.
I'm goaling for this year, but it's one of those that keeps getting put on the back burner. So that would be that's a big goal for me, because that's also one of those that you have to look inward.
Yes.
It's a lot of quiet time with yourself. So yeah.
Beautiful.
That's a big one.
I had a friend and a guest. First a guest, I now call her a friend. And she came on to talk about imposter syndrome. And she actually recently did a certification in yoga. Now she's an executive coach and leadership culture coach, but essentially she's now bringing in some of the sort of yoga practices into her coaching, which is so fascinating. So something, I'm sure that you would,
It's something I keep starting, but a lot of the, it's kind of newish out there, is the somatic healing.
Yes.
It stems from yoga, but it's basically releasing all the tension in your body to help you overcome a lot of the issues we face without necessarily going to therapy. It's realigning energy in our body.
Yeah.
It's interesting. And they often say in yoga, where you carry your pain or your tension is dependent on what's going on in your life.
Yeah, 100%. We need to, and that's something that is I want to explore somatic movement in my own life. And so that's definitely on my bucket list. But yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Jolene, for being on the podcast. And you've been thank you for being so generous with all of your information. And if people want to contact you, obviously I'm going to encourage them. I'm going to link also the Holistic Health Made Easy podcast. But is there, if they want to connect with you, is it Instagram that's the best way, or your website?
Instagram's the best. It's Holistic Health Made Simple everywhere.
Amazing. Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
I thank you so much for having me. This has been so fun ever since we had chocolate together.
Well, yeah, we didn't even tell the listeners the story, but we basically met at the podcast conference in LA, which I've talked about in one of my podcast episodes. And as I was leaving the conference, there was a sign, speaking of eating, but anyway, there was a sign that said like gourmet chocolate. I can't remember the name of it. It was like gourmet chocolate. And I was like, ooh, I'm in LA. I should definitely have gourmet chocolate, because that's, what you do, not what you do. But anyway, and I was like, ooh, this is interesting. I was looking at the sign, and then you kind of stopped and you were like looking at the sign too. And I was like, I think I'm going to go check them out. And you were like, I'm going to come too. And then we went to this really nice little boutique chocolatier, and I think I was quizzing the woman extensively on like the gradients of chocolate. And anyway, but we ended up getting a little bit of chocolate for us and our partners, which was really nice.
It was really nice. It was a pleasure meeting you, and thank you so much for having me today. It was nice talking to you again.
It was so nice to talk to you too. And thank you so much. And you're always welcome on the podcast. So we're sending you so much love, and we will talk to you soon. Thank you, Jolene. And thank you for listening. We'll talk to you guys soon, EnvisionAirs. Thanks everyone for listening to the EnvisionAir podcast. Make sure that you like and subscribe to this podcast so that you stay up to date on all of our new episodes.